for the kind presentation, for the invitation. It's always a pleasure and an honor. And also thanks for the presentation that I've seen until now. They are all very interesting. Now I'm going to share the presentation. See the keynote. Can you see it?
Yes. Yes, of course.
Okay, thank you. So I will talk about masculinity in Elizabethan England, and in particular how this masculinity was constructed in Elizabethan era through the influential works of three Italian writers, John Florio, Baldassare Castiglione, and Vincentio Saviolo. So how the masculinity had an influential role in the Elizabethan era through the role of the Italianate Englishman. When we talk about masculinity, you know, the notion of masculinity is elusive, sometimes defined, clear definition. It's based sometimes from a collection of cliché symbols that together form a rough, imperfect archetype commonly identified as man. Though the specific traits associated with masculinity may shift across era time, the image shows a striking resilience. Traditionally, men are expected to be providers, protectors. They are resolute, they are hardworking, emotionally restrained and stoic, and this was the image of the classic man in the Elizabethan era. But let's analyze how the figure of the Italianate Englishman play a role into the construction of a new masculinity in the late Elizabethan era. When we talk about the Italianate Englishman, during the Elizabethan era, there was a negative view of the Italianate Englishman. What you are reading right now is a quote by Roger Ascham. Ascham was an English teacher, and he published this work, The Schoolmaster, in which he portrayed a negative view of the Italianate Englishman. He believed that Englishmen had to stay away from Italy, from Italians, because they were dangerous. Here he writes, I was once in Italy myself, but thank God I just was there for 9 days. And yet I saw in that little time in one city more liberty to sin than ever I had tell of it in our noble city of London in 9 years. And then he writes this popular proverb at the time, Inglese italianato è un diavolo incarnato. Englishman Italianate is a devil incarnate. That is to say, you remain man in shape and fashion, but you become a devil in life and condition. So basically, this proverb wanted to warn Englishmen to stay away from foreign influence and moral corruption. So Italy was perceived as a land of vice, associated with sin, seduction, spiritual danger. And at the time, this figure of the Italianate Englishman becomes a stock character. The Englishman Italianate is cosmopolitan, is morally corrupt, and is satirized by many contemporaries of the time, Robert Greene, Master, Ben Jonson, and many of them did not travel to Italy. They never visited Italy, so they were not able to judge whether really an Englishman could learn his vice or folly in Italy. But there was this stock character that was satirized in theater at the time. So basically, this Italianate Englishman was not merely cultural, but could be dangerous. So it was seen as untrustworthy. So while at the same level, there was a great admiration for Italian language and Italian literature. Queen Elizabeth I admired Italian language, but at the same time, it coexists this fear for Italian vice and moral decay. And the symbol, the most important representative of this culture, of this Italianate culture, was John Florio. He was born in London, but he came from an Italian family. His father was Italian, possibly his mother was English, and he described himself as Englishman in Italian. Everything John Florio produced was the product of this bridge between Italy and England. He published language lessons manuals in both Italian and English. He published the first Italian English dictionary, a world of words. He contributed to English language with many words. But he himself, John Florio, pointed out in one of his language lessons manual in 1591 that there was this fear for the Italianate Englishman. He writes, "My enemies have a knife at command to cut my throat, because an Englishman Italianate is a devil incarnate." So there was this association with moral ambiguity. Italianate culture was elegant, charming, but it was tied to Renaissance vice as well as virtue. And I'm going to show you how through the works of John Florio we can better understand how masculinity was performed and how the Italianate masculinity shaped the Elizabethan culture. For example, when Florio published his first two Italian English language lessons manuals, First Fruits and Second Fruits, he described these works as two daughters. So he compares the first two works to his daughters and offspring of my care and study. And then he proceeded with a metaphor, asserting that the elder, First Fruits, because she was ambitious, I married for preferment and for honor. But this younger, Second Fruits, is better, riper and pleasanter than the first. And since it's fairer, better nurtured and comelier than her sister, he hopes that it will be better received and appreciated than the first work. So he used the metaphor of the written work as a daughter, and the writer Florio is a paternal figure who must guide her marriage and public presentation. And in the Renaissance, masculinity was closely tied to authority, lineage, control over the household or family, both literally and metaphorically. So Florio feminized his works but retains paternal control. So he referred to First Fruits, Second Fruits, the first two Italian English language lessons manual, as his daughter and offspring. So he exercised a kind of textual fatherhood. And then he uses this word, this proverbial remark, to lead apes in hell. This phrase, will not lead apes in hell, we find both in Florio and in Shakespeare, is a proverbial reference to the fate of spinsters, so to women who couldn't get married, who didn't get married, so reinforcing the social value of marriage and reproduction, both literal and literally. So we find this proverb in Shakespeare, The Taming of the Shrew, in Act 2, Scene 1, and it's used by Catherine to express her frustration and resentment toward her sister-in-law, toward Bianca, upcoming wedding, and her own perceived mistreatment. So Catherine says, "She is your treasure, she must have a husband. I must dance barefoot on her wedding day, and for your law to her lead apes in hell." So in contrast, when Florio will publish the first Italian English dictionary, this time this work is not a daughter anymore, it's masculine. This is how he described this work. The first Italian English dictionary was published in 1598, and Florio contributed to English language with many new words. And talking about words and deeds, he described them as words are feminine, words are feminine, while deeds are masculine. So he drew from a long-standing cultural dichotomy, because speech is passive, is ephemeral, is emotional, thus is feminine, while action is active, is forceful, rational, therefore is masculine. And Florio's response to this is transgressive, is provocative, because he challenged the idea that words are feminine and unworthy of being considered masculine, and he collapsed the traditional binary, and he writes that words and deeds with me are all one gender. So he claimed power to regender language through strong imagination. And the final work that shows how masculinity was performed through language in the Elizabethan era is the first translation from French to English of Michel de Montaigne. This is considered one of the most important works in the Elizabethan era. Florio translated Montaigne essays in 1963, and he describes this work as female. Why? Because translation is defective, since all translations are reputed female, delivered at second hand, and in this served I but as Vulcan to hatch this Minerva from Jupiter big brain. So this final passage from Florio translation of Montaigne essays introduce another rich gender metaphor for authorship, because deepens the ongoing negotiation of Renaissance masculinity through language. Florio described this translation as defective, but not due to any personal failing, but because all translations are reputed females, so culturally coded as secondary, so less authoritative than an original work. So if translation is a second-hand and feminine, then the translator risks occupying a marginalized or compromised position. So he's neither originator nor true creator. But he frames this masculine role not only as a translator, but as a kind of a midwife, as an adoptive father, reinvesting this feminine product with masculine meaning, care and dignity, because Florio described himself as a foster father. So he shifts to the domestic view of the translator. He imagined himself not as a biological father, but as foster father. So someone who dresses, who educates, he guides this foreign-born daughter into the English society. Again, he depicts this work as a woman, and this metaphor is deeply gendered and hierarchical, but it also strangely tender, sweet, because likening the translation to a young woman from France, whom he clothes, he instructs, and sent into noble service, Florio performs a masculinity of care, of cultivation, rather than raw authorship. And there are two books that are important to understand the Italianate Englishman and how it influenced masculinity in the Elizabethan era. One is the most important, Baldassare Castiglione, Il Cortigiano, the book of the courtier, that play a fundamental role in shaping ideals of masculinity in the English Renaissance, particularly through its vision of the ideal courtly man. Castiglione defines the perfect courtier as noble, graceful, eloquent, physically skilled, especially in arms and sport, and morally virtue. And this model influenced English construction of masculinity by encouraging a balanced masculinity, so strength tempered with refinement, and promoting self-discipline and decorum as masculine virtue. So a gentleman must master his emotion, speech and gestures, and he elevates cultural competence. So let's learn poetry, music, conversation. It's a sign of elite masculinity. And while Castiglione ideal became aspirational and influenced English society, it also sparked tension in the English context because he used this word sprezzatura, which was the art of effortless grace, so hiding labor behind polish ease. But at the same time, it could be a sign of effeminacy, so duplicity, especially in the anxious moral climate of the time. The second and last book that inspired this Italianate Englishman culture in Elizabethan England is Vincentio Saviolo Fancy Manual. Vincenzo Saviolo was an Italian fancy master, active in 16th century, the most popular of the time, and he published the first fancy manual in England. He taught the Italian repertoire, emphasizing elegance, discipline, and honor. And he combined martial skill with Renaissance ideas of civility and self-control. And he played a key role in shaping the ideal of the gentleman soulmate in the Elizabethan culture because Vincenzo Saviolo, the heart of his work is the concept of the honor, so which during the late 16th century was inseparable from masculinity. Honor was publicly defined; it existed in the eyes of others, and this manual outlines not only techniques of combat, so how to play fence, but also how to respond to insults, how to respond to challenging, presented the duel as an ethical and rhetorical performance. So he turned controlled violence into a signifier of manhood and insisted that masculinity includes knowing when, how, and why to fight. And his manual includes a dialogue between Saviolo and his student and his pupil, which is the same format that we find in Castiglione, the book of the courtier. So in this case, violence is refined, is ritualized, is not chaotic. This soulmate must also be a man of words. It must be a man of wit, of judgment. So masculinity is tied to self-control, so to discipline. And as a conclusion to this, the legacy of Saviolo masculinity in the Elizabethan culture extended beyond fencing because Saviolo, as well as Baldassare Castiglione, shaped the ethos of Jacobean era, whose honor and masculinity were tied to dueling and display. And this idea of the Italianate Englishman is also found in Shakespearean drama, especially in the characters of Tybalt in Romeo and Juliet, in Hotspur in the Fifth Part of Henry IV, where masculinity is tested through honor and combat. And in conclusion, the Italianate Englishman is shaped by the works mainly of John Florio, who was the most important representative of Italian Renaissance and Italian humanistic culture in Elizabethan England, and through the works of Baldassare Castiglione and Vincenzo Saviolo. They play a central role in redefining Renaissance masculinity because Florio's language manuals, his dictionary, cultivated eloquence and cosmopolitan polish. Castiglione Book of the Courtier framed manhood as a balance of noble birth, rhetorical skill, and graceful performance, while Saviolo Fencing Manual elevated honor and martial control into key masculine virtue. So together, these people, this writer, imported an ideal of masculinity that was performative, refined, self-aware, an identity not simply inherited or enforced through violence, but crafted through learning, style, honor. So though sometimes viewed with suspicion, the Italianate model ultimately offered Englishmen a modern, cultivated ideal of manhood, blending strength with civility, with performance and principle. These are the sources used I thank you. And regarding Agnieszka and the novel that I published, the novel it's about John Florio and the years that he spent at the French embassy from 1583 to 1585. Hopefully it will publish in English as well this autumn, about October, possibly November. This is the cover that Agnieszka loves so much, so I'm going to show it. And it was done by a great artist, Martina Dimkowska, and it's a novel about this complex historical figure who imported all the Italianate culture in Elizabethan England, while he had a great success during those years. He was the most important Italian humanist. As I also show you in the presentation, he also faced death threats because foreign culture at the time was perceived as something dangerous. But Florio kept on because he believed that importing culture was enrichment, and so this is what he did his whole life, and this is what I also tell in the novel. Thank you so much.